On February 1st, 2019, in Madrid, Spain, police entered the house of a missing person, their senses immediately assaulted by the putrid stench of death. As they ventured further inside, the horror of the scene unfolded before them like a nightmare. Alberto, a 26-year-old man, had committed the most heinous of acts, butchering his own mother and using her flesh as a means of sustenance. The remains of the 68-year-old woman were scattered throughout the house, her body dismembered into small, grotesque pieces. And if that wasn't enough, he had also fed her to his pet dog. The officers were left to grapple with the sheer depravity of the situation, unsure if they would ever be able to erase the memory of the unspeakable horrors they had just witnessed. Before we start, if you find this video fascinating, then at the end, please drop it a like and let me know what you thought about the case. It helps the channel. Also, don't forget to hit subscribe for more. Thank you. The victim was 68-year-old Maria Soledad Gomez. The first person who noticed something was amiss was a close friend of Maria's. She hadn't seen her for a month, when they used to meet almost every day in one of the neighborhood bars to have beer and eat tapas. But her friend's worst fears were confirmed when she reported her missing to the authorities, knowing deep down that something sinister had occurred to Maria. Maria did not live alone. She shared her home with her 26-year-old son, Alberto Sanchez Gomez. He was once a waiter, but in recent months, he had developed a dangerous and destructive habit of drinking and using substances. As his addiction consumed him, dark and twisted signs began to surface. In the days leading up to the murder, Alberto started posting rap videos on Instagram, in which he chillingly confessed to his vices, and even declared, "There is no cure to my madness." As the evidence against him mounted, it became clear that the true perpetrator behind Maria's disappearance was none other than her own flesh and blood. The realization that the monster who committed such a heinous crime was someone Maria had trusted and loved only adds to the horror of the situation. The relationship between Maria and Alberto was dysfunctional to say the least. About 15 years before her death, Maria lost her husband, a cabinet maker by profession. She was left alone to take care of their 2 children. The loss of her husband forever destroyed a family that until then seemed normal. The older brother moved out when he was young and married, leaving just Maria and Alberto. Maria had taken out a restraining order against Alberto because he physically and routinely attacked her. The older brother had tried to mediate between them, without success. When neighbours asked about the bruises she sometimes had on her body, she lied and said that she had fallen whilst walking the dog. But the truth was more sinister. Her own son was the one who had been hurting her. Maria would regularly kick Alberto out of the house, and he would spend a few days sleeping on friends' sofas. But eventually, he would call, and she would always take him in. Despite the abuse, Maria couldn't bring herself to cut ties with her son, even when she knew the type of person she had raised was capable of attacking her. She couldn't let him go. She told neighbours, "He's my son. What do you expect me to do?" When the police began investigating the disappearance of Maria, one of the first things they did was knock on the door of the Salamanca apartment, where both Maria and Alberto lived. The authorities asked Alberto where his mother was. Alberto replied, "My mother is in here, dead. Me and the dog have been eating her, bit by bit." He let them in. One officer described Alberto as calm. We entered the home to see if she needed help. In the second room, we found human remains, and in the kitchen, a pot containing more, said one of the officers. He was very calm. I didn't see any emotion of any kind. He was very calm, very cold. The police were horrified by the scene they found inside the home, and the fact that Alberto could be so unemotional about the brutal murder of his own mother. As the police entered the flat, they were met with a scene straight out of a nightmare. Limbs wrapped in plastic lay scattered throughout various rooms, the stench of death permeating the air. But the horror was far from over. In the fridge, they found body parts, neatly packaged and ready for consumption. In the oven, they discovered more remains, roasted for a meal. Even the dog was not spared, as his mother's remains had been given to him as a gruesome treat. As they ventured deeper into the flat, the officers couldn't help but feel their stomachs turn as they stumbled upon the bedroom. There on the bed lay the head, hands and heart of the victim, the mother of the very person they had come to arrest. Alberto, the alleged perpetrator, stood before them, a cold and unfeeling expression on his face. He offered no explanation, no remorse for the atrocities he had committed. One officer, unable to bear the sight any longer, ran out of the flat to the street, where he proceeded to retch, the handiwork of a cannibal too much to bear. As they apprehended Alberto and transferred him to the police headquarters, the officers couldn't shake off the feeling of disgust and revulsion that had taken hold of them. This was a crime beyond comprehension, an act that defied all logic. The officers knew that they would never be able to unsee the horrors that lay within that flat, and the memory of the stench, the sight and the taste of death would haunt them forever. The confession that Alberto gave was chilling in its matter-of-factness. He revealed that after a heated argument with his mother, he had approached her from behind and strangled her to death, suffocating her in the process. He then proceeded to move her corpse to the bedroom, where he began the gruesome task of dismembering her body, using a carpenter's saw and kitchen knives. For the next 15 days, Alberto fed on his mother's remains, both himself and his pet dog, keeping the meat fresh in plastic containers and the refrigerator. But as some of the meat spoiled, he was forced to dispose of it in plastic bags in the trash. Some of his mother's intestines were found discarded in this way. As the officers listened to Alberto's confession, they couldn't help but feel a sense of revulsion and disgust. The idea of someone committing such a heinous act, let alone consuming the remains of their own mother, this was beyond comprehension. It was clear that Alberto had lost his humanity, consumed by a dark and twisted urge. Whilst in prison awaiting trial, Alberto was writing to a friend, expressing his remorse, but also trying to explain what happened. He said, "Whenever I get up and go to bed, I think it's been a nightmare. What's done is done, and I'll be sad all my life. It wasn't me who was acting when all this happened. I am mentally ill, and I hope it will help me in court. I was sick a long time ago, and I took refuge in substances. I had been hearing voices and having hallucinations for a long time. All of this led me to the worst thing that has happened to me in my life. I miss you all a lot, just like my mother. I am not comfortable here. I hope they take me to a psychiatric centre after the trial." According to a friend of Alberto, the 26-year-old had a history of psychiatric issues and had been admitted to hospitals up to 3 times. He reportedly suffered from a delusion due to persecution disorder. However, during his 4th admission, the public health department deemed him not to be as severe. The friend, who wishes to remain anonymous, revealed that the trigger for Alberto's descent into madness was a trip to Greece, where he received a scholarship. During this trip, he began to have problems and started consuming substances. It is unclear from the information provided if the psychiatric hospitals and the public health department knew about his history of mental health problems, and if they took adequate measures to ensure he received the proper treatment and care, or if the authorities were aware of the situation, and if they could have taken any actions to prevent such a tragic event from happening. But sometimes there is only so much people can do. His friends said Alberto's life changed when he went to Greece. Around him, he was no longer the same. From being a flirtatious, normal boy who liked to party from time to time with his friends, he became an introverted guy with paranoia in his head. Alberto pleaded in court that he was mentally ill at the time of his mother's murder, claiming that he had received a secret message to kill his mother whilst watching television. He also stated that he did not remember committing the murder. However, the court found him guilty of homicide and the desecration of a human corpse, dismissing his claims of a psychotic episode. The jury, consisting of 6 women and 3 men, handed down a 15-year and 5-month prison sentence to Alberto. He was ordered to pay compensation of 90,000 euros to his older brother. This ruling came after a 2-week trial in Madrid. It is important to note that a legal conviction does not necessarily mean that the accused does not have mental health issues. It is a complex issue that involves the intersection of legal and mental health systems, and the court may have based their decision on the available evidence and expert testimony. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay sane.